What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Living Corporate, and look, Living Corporate has been around since 2018, and there have been countless slayings of black and brown bodies in the 5 years that we've been doing this. And so, yet again, we're faced with a reminder of a few different things. One, that we are not in a post-racial society. Two, that words and actions by our civic political leaders matter. And that three, the threat of death is ever present for historically marginalized people. The suddenness and randomness of these losses is triggering. It's challenging. Jacksonville is the latest, but it certainly wasn't the first, and it sadly will not be the last. And I just, at a certain point, I get at a loss for words. I will say it's moments like these that remind me and really reinforce why employee experience is so critical. You know, like your employees in this moment, now I'm talking to leaders, your employees in this moment, yeah, they're looking for a statement on Jacksonville. They are. They're looking for you to make a statement on Jacksonville's. Your black and brown employees, your black employees specifically, are looking, especially your black employees in the Florida who live and work in Florida, or who maybe do business and frequent Florida often. They're looking for you to make a statement. And you can act like it's not a big deal or whatever. I want you to know that you're losing those employees. Now, maybe you want to lose them. That wouldn't be a good financial decision because it costs money to replace talent, but maybe you're on a downwind anyway. So you're just like, hey, I'm just going to be disengaged as a leader to encourage folks to get out of here, the people I didn't want here anyway. I don't know. But if you're not trying to alienate your talent, they're looking for a statement. But beyond them looking for a statement that you publish on your social media that'll get a bunch of positive press, if worded well and promoted effectively, they're really looking for your policies and processes and procedures to reinforce why their lives matter at your job. So are there programs and leadership tracks and sponsorship opportunities? Are there benefits to help support ongoing education and certification and learning? Are there transparent pay policies? Are there clear performance management guidelines and transparent performance management processes and practices? These things actually reinforce and tie back into like the everyday lived experience of your black employees. Like, I'm not expecting, and most employees are not expecting for their employer to end racism or to somehow stop gun violence. They are looking for their leaders to create an environment where, at least where they know when they log in to their day-to-day, that they matter. And again, not in some esoteric, theoretical, lovey-dovey way. No, that their careers matter, that their livelihood matters. And there's things you can do to just create a strong employee experience that would reinforce that their lives matter. I think it's this thing we do with diversity, equity, and inclusion lately, and really since the murder of George Floyd, all these really terrible actors have come in and they've made DEI like this separate entity that exists way over in the corner somewhere. But in reality, DEI is critical in strong employee experience. And you need to have strong employee experience to retain your employees and get them producing at the levels that you want. If you can't connect the dots between DEI, employee experience, and engagement and talent strategy, then you're doing it wrong. Anyway, look, that, I wanted to speak briefly on the events of the weekend. I'm praying for my family who lives in Florida, my friends who live in Florida. And in addition to praying, I'm acting. So I want to make sure you click the link in the show notes to donate to local institutions and causes in and around Jacksonville. Make sure you do that. And make sure that if you're a leader, especially if you're a leader in the Florida area, that you're pushing for systemic changes in your organization so that all employees, particularly your Black and brown employees, know that they are valued and that they matter. Now, with that being said, I'm excited about the conversation we were able to have today with Danny Guillory. Now, those who know, Danny Guillory has been on the show several times, like Quiet as Kept, truly one of my favorites. I mean, no disrespect to the hundreds of other people that have been on this show, because y'all are my favorites too. You know what I mean? But Danny's like a three-peater. He's been on the show several times, right? And he always drops gems when he comes on. Thankful. Talk about his role at Glassdoor. We talk about, some of the work he's been able to do and drive as a leader in this space, and his pivot from DEI to this head of people, and how everything comes together. Talking about the landscape, talking about the future of work and the future of the DEI space with this the rise of artificial intelligence. And of course, I ain't about to spoil. I ain't about to do all this. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna pay some bills. All right. Then after that, you're gonna hear this conversation. Super fire. Talk to you soon. Danny, look, I'm gonna tell you something. Look, I'm not gonna act like I don't talk to a lot of executives. Okay, I'm not gonna gas you or lie or play. However, you gotta be my top 3 favorite returning long-term friends of the show. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing all right, Zach. I appreciate you asking. It's always the work is a challenge right now, but for me, it's a challenge in a good way. It's really invigorating, and I'm really enjoying the environment I'm in and the shift in role.
Right. So, look, man, let's get right to it. Right. Let's get to the tea. You know what I'm saying? The Earl Grey, as it were. The last time we spoke, the last 2 times we spoke, you were the head of DEI at Dropbox. You've now taken on head of people at Glassdoor. Talk to me about that transition. We talked a lot, right, about the fact that you're one of the longer tenured DEI executives that have really been on Living Corporate. Typically, we might have people that come back, but if they come back 3 times, they've had a job, they've switched jobs 4 times, right? So, talk to me about that journey and some of the differences in the role that you're experiencing.
Sure. And I think there's some really important points about the journey, because getting into this role required not only the work that I do, but also some supportive people and some structures around me. So one of the things that happened while I was at Dropbox was that I had a really wonderful manager, Melanie Collins, who's the chief people officer there. And prior to her going out on maternity leave, she surveyed a number of us who reported to her and asked us which of us were interested in potentially becoming a chief people officer at some point. 2 of us raised our hands, and so while she was on her 6-month maternity leave, she gave each of us 3 months in the role, myself and one of my peers, the 2 of us who raised our hands. And that was really the first kind of step in this direction, giving me the experience and the exposure that I needed to get, both myself and my peer. What also happened is that at the same time, Glassdoor opened its search shortly after I finished my tenure as an interim chief people officer but they ended up engaging with a unique organization called Black Progress Matters to do their search. So it's an organization that focuses on recruiting, identifying and recruiting Black executives for roles. Because to be honest, with my background, even though I'm impressed with my background and think it's great, it's an alternative background for a chief people officer role. It's not a normal route. So that was the second piece that had to come into play. I had a manager who was supportive. I had an organization that was looking for potentially alternative types of candidates. And then the third thing was the unique match with the organization. So the thing about Glassdoor that they talked about a lot as I interviewed with them was that transparency is obviously paramount for them. That's their business. And a lot of people traditionally in HR may not be comfortable with that. What's interesting is that having been a chief diversity officer, transparency is what we live for. That levels the playing field. It's the foundation of almost all diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. So for me, I was 100% comfortable with that. And that was something that I encourage and want to see. In addition, I was also in a unique situation where being the chief people officer at Glassdoor is kind of this meta role where, yes, I'm a chief people officer internally, but they actually want to have my opinion as well as the perspective of the people from my team on the product and how we use it and what we can do externally. So there's a business side to this role that doesn't exist traditionally in a lot of chief people officer roles. So it was really this unique kind of connection of a variety of things that got me there. So I think the first thing that I'd wanted to share a little bit, and I'll share a little bit more about the role, but I wanted to start out first about the journey, because the journey I think is a different one, and hopefully it's something that your listeners can at least relate to or connect with in some way and see where they can make different connections to get to something that may be a little bit alternative for them.
You know, there's something to be said about like, so I receive everything you said. I'm gonna tell you the through line I heard is empowerment, right? So there's this pattern I'm seeing, and I've continued to see, like that not every role, not everybody, these diversity roles, like they could call you the chief grand poobah of diversity, right? That there's a tight box that they fit you in, and there's this presumption of inferior business acumen or inferior business acuity, consultative or go-to-market acuity, because you are the diversity person. And so it's exciting to hear that you're in an environment that that sees you as a critical point of insight into like the business, which is, I believe, like a foundational entry point into like integrating your people strategy with your go-to-market and like your actual business strategy, right? It transforms, even if it's only subtly or informally, it transforms that role into like, it connects it to revenue in some way. And that to me is exciting. Absolutely.
And in different companies it will look different. There are some where the signal is really strong between those two. There may be some also where the signal is a little bit weak, to be honest. You know, if you're a B2B company that's working with large corporations selling large types of things, it may be a little bit tougher to make that connection. But the stronger we can make that connection, I think the more relevant we can become to the organization. I also think there's something to I think that's really the kind of another frontier for all of us those of us who are in the diversity, equity, and inclusion roles, and thinking through that and seeing. I was just at a conference last week, in fact, where a number of the people talked about it and talked about a lot of their business accomplishments also with the organizations that they had been with, which I think is powerful. I think as we move up, what I'm also seeing more so now as I talk to a number of people, I think DEI people are getting savvier and more experienced as we continue in this industry. And so a lot of us, I had people that were asking me about how I was able to land a role like this because it's something that they're interested in. And I'm not the first. There are a number of people before me who've moved from DEI to this role. So I'm by no means the first. There are a number of people who've done this. But they were curious about that. And what I'm also finding is that a number of diversity executives are now, for their next roles, asking for at a minimum to have DEI plus some other function. Because the hard part with diversity is that it is traditionally a role with, I like to use a Texas saying, big hat, no cattle. Okay? And what I mean by that is you have these audacious goals and plans for the organization, but you typically don't own the machinery that executes on that. And that was one of the things that I was excited about in terms of taking on the role of chief people officer, because, and I've been fortunate both at Autodesk and at Dropbox to have great partners to work with, but it's different when you have to negotiate with learning and organizational development versus it reports to you. It's different when you have to negotiate with talent acquisition versus when it reports to you. It's a different dynamic. And so even though diversity is only one part of it, the ability to embed it naturally, I think, is amplified when somebody is in this role versus in the role of the diversity, equity, and inclusion exec, which kind of works in between everything. That was one of the things that, frankly, was also exciting to me. That plus, I was really looking forward to opining and being a part of overall what's happening strategically with the organization. That I felt like there were muscles of mine that weren't being exercised, and so it's been quite enjoyable, even though there have been plenty of challenges along the way.
So we're going to talk about those challenges in a minute. The other thing I'll say to that is, like, to your point, right? Like, it's tough when you do have these audacious goals as like a DEI officer, but you don't have headcount, but then you also don't have authority to like really mobilizing. So it's a lot of influence and authority despite you having a chief title, right? So you're almost really functioning like a senior director or something, or maybe like a strong individual contributor that has some help to help you influence, but not necessarily command anything. And I also think like it's really counterintuitive, right? To like have this DEI function that by its nature should be thinking and operating systemically, but has no direct authority or control over any systems. So you have to, like, to your point, like there's negotiating that has to happen all the time. And I mean, look, we're all human beings. So like there might be a day that you just you're off. You might not feel like negotiating that day. And so there's a lot of internalized, there's a lot of pressure that compounds over time because you have to essentially show up as all things to all people all the time, right?
Yes. One of the things, so I got into diversity work, and I may have said this, I think, in one of the previous podcasts, really via my father, who is one of kind of the founding fathers in this work. He started doing diversity, equity, inclusion work in the mid-1980s before it was fashionable. And one of the things that he always said as the industry progressed was that people in diversity, equity, and inclusion roles should probably think about rotating out of them every 3 to 5 years, simply because you're constantly kind of pushing against the grain and against different systems in terms of how they work, and putting yourself in the middle of discussions where you may not be invited all the time. Sometimes you might be, but sometimes you may not be, and that can take its toll on people over time. So he even said many, many years ago that he thought it was a role that somebody should probably rotate in and out of versus maintaining it over a long period of time for the reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah. Now let's go back to what you said though about them challenges, right? Like the landscape right now. It's interesting because to your point about Glassdoor's, like, I mean, there's the values that you say, and then there's like the culture and the values are just endemic to your brand. And I would say, to your point, like, it would be hard for me to imagine Glassdoor not being transparent or embracing transparency as an operational value, as a cultural norm. So my question is, there's this long-standing position that many hold that HR is meant to protect the company, and transparency or over-transparency is a weakness because it exposes vulnerability, and vulnerability meaning like organizational, reputational, litigious risk. I'm curious, how is it that you apply the principle of transparency and holding to that principle. And at the same time, you are the chief, you are HR at the company. Like, what does that look like experientially, practically? What does that mean?
Well, I actually believe that transparency is something that, first of all, I think it's good. Let me step back. My belief is that there are very few secrets out there, and people are going to find out anything anyway if they want to. The question is, do you want to be honest about it as quickly as possible and address it, or do you want to try and dodge it for a while and then it comes up in some other form? So I actually believe in the principle that constant and regular transparency is much better hygiene. It's almost like scientific principles of pressure. Do you want to like hold all the pressure in and then have an explosion, or do you want to continually let the pressure come out? And so you're maintaining a kind of a constant state of some kind of a constant state. So for me, I'm a big believer in it, first of all, because I think people are going to find out everything anyway, for the most part. So that's number one. The second thing is, like we said before, I think it's key for leveling the playing field for everybody. If everybody knows what's going on, it means that I'm opting in as an employee to be here with full information. I can opt out if I hear things and see things that I don't like. But ideally, what you're doing is you're getting people who want to who want to be there. Really think of it like a relationship. Okay, when you think about a relationship, if somebody has a significant other, is it better to, when things aren't good, to shove it under the carpet and keep going, or does that create and lay the seeds for problems later on? Okay, and all the workplace is a relation. It's a set of relationships between people who work together, and it's a relationship between us as an employer and a set of employees. And to me, good hygiene with respect to that relationship is us being as open and as honest about what's happening and what we're all experiencing. Now, what goes along with that is it doesn't mean that the news is always good. So if somebody wants to control the message 100% and make sure that what's coming out is making everybody happy and feel good, then yes, transparency isn't for you. But again, I make the comparison of the relationship between employer and employer being like a relationship with a significant other or a good friend. The best friends and the best long-term relationships that I know of weren't perfect all along. Okay? There are always challenges that we have to go through. The question is, are we proactive about it, okay? Or do we wait for them to come up and surprise us from behind unexpectedly? So to me, I'm a big believer in transparency. Now, with respect to, there are some obvious limits that we have based on either legal or ethical principles sometimes, and of course we follow those. But for the most part, there's a lot that people can share that they choose not to. I mean, for us, for example, you can go to our blog and you can see our salary bands. You can see our our comp philosophy. You can see everything in great detail. And that means if somebody's coming to this company, they're fully informed when they come. To me, that's really powerful. I think full information is better, so that each and every one of us can make a conscious decision about where we want to be.
I want to keep going on these challenges. So the other thing I'm curious about is on the DEI side, right? Like we're seeing DEI be under attack, right? We're seeing teams take out the word diversity, right? As you look at this landscape now, you and I, honestly, it's dope. We've actually known each other for years, but I would say, I think I've always been more on the pessimistic side. I don't see corporate DEI existing in the same scale or breadth in the next 3 to 4 years. Like, what do you see for this space in this work? Like, to me, it seems as if we constantly are renaming and changing and shifting. And now there's these question marks on what's legal or not. I don't know. How do you feel about it as you see what's going on?
So all of us, this was a big point of discussion at the conference that I attended last week with a number of diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders. This is all obviously top of mind for everybody right now. So let's talk about a few things. So one is that every initiative in an organization, every business initiative, goes through phases where things are easy or things are difficult. So I think the first thing is that companies are being tested as to whether or not they were serious about it. So the expansion that took place after 2020 impacted companies across the board. To me, this is kind of the period where we see now who was really serious about it and who wasn't. So that's the first thing. Is there a number of people who did things that may have been more performative? To me, if you put something out there and then once things get a little bit difficult, get rid of it entirely, then you probably didn't care about it to begin with. Okay. So that's that group. In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion itself, we've always had to make adjustments and be nimble and think through things. So to me, the first thing that happened was back during the Reagan years was the beginning of affirmative action. That was when affirmative action in its true form took root. Then because of lawsuits and conservative twists and things like that, then we moved to something like what we have now, what's commonly referred to as the Rooney Rule, as a way as we looked at top of funnel instead. First of all, the current rulings that came down were strictly limited to higher education. They weren't applying to corporate, but I think we all know something else is probably coming down the pike because of this and because of what the court looks like now. So what that means is that we're going to, again, have to get more creative, just like we did in the shift from affirmative action to leveraging the Rooney Rule. Now, what I'm going to share a little bit about is not, they weren't my insights. They were insights that came from one of the speakers at the conference. But one of the things that he shared, forgetting his last name, he works at NYU Law School. And he talked about the fact that, and it's interesting because it's similar to some of the principles around diversity, equity, and inclusion. One is that any place that it can become, so first of all, anything that we can do to work against bias generically is still something that would be protected. So an example of that, for what I mean, is that before we go through our performance review calibration process, before we go through our promotion process, we actually have, and this is common to a number of organizations, we're not unique in this, but a number of organizations, including ours, have people go through a very short training or review about different biases and how they come up in the workplace. Recency bias, halo bias, different things like that. So as we raise discussions of bias across the board, that's something that will still be able to, because again, that's something that lifts all boats. Okay? The second, I think, thing that we'll want to do is to think through how programming is designed in a way that, again, lifts up all groups, creates opportunity for all groups, but ensures that we're addressing the needs of what may be underrepresented groups in any given organization. A lot of that is around how we frame, how we invite people to the table, how we encourage people to participate in things. And so any place that we can integrate diversity work into how operations function will probably be something that will be more sustainable versus standalone types of programs that sit outside of the mainstream. So I think what we lose in the process, because there's always a trade-off, what we lose in the process is the hyper-focus. So that we lose. For the ones that are really smart about it, what we do gain is that the focus really has to be systemic now. Okay? So it's not about creating an alternative system. If we create an alternative system that sits outside of the regular mainstream, that is what will be at risk. If you're integrating things in a way that that helps the populations that you'd like to really focus on, as well as creating something that's available for other populations, then I think that's the kind of thing that will sustain itself. And what's been interesting, just to say one more thing before you jump in, is that one of the things that I found a lot of times when we started to do certain things around diversity was that people would say, "Oh, this is great. I want to do it for all my employees." And so we would do that. An example for me of that is when we were at Dropbox, and I mentioned this in one of the other podcasts, as part of our diversity retention efforts, we started doing stay interviews. And we found that stay interviews or engagement interviews. And we found that there was a pretty significant impact to retention to populations that we did that with versus populations that we didn't. My manager at Dropbox said, "Hey, this is great. I'd actually like to do this for everybody." And so we ended up doing a lighter version of this across the entire company. So that's the kind of thing that, usually there's another speaker that we had come into one of our DEI offsites when I was at Dropbox who talked about when you solve for the edges, you end up figuring out things for everybody. That's what the essence of DEI work is a lot of times, solving for the edges and coming up with solutions that apply to everybody. And so I think we're just going to have to probably solve for the edges and come to these more global solutions a little quicker than we have in the past.
As we talk about this, and as we in the landscape, this idea of integration, and rather your DEI or workplace fairness or equity or whatever you want to call it. There's some groups now calling themselves like the inclusive experiences team. Them being like infused or like woven into the fabric of the organization. I mean, honestly, that was feedback and guidance that folks have been saying for a while. It just seems like now the environmental pressures, I'll say, are now making that to where that's the way that this is going to sustain, right?
Right. Now, the one thing, so yes, absolutely, but there's going to be a yes and I've heard this from other people and other peers. What is critical to the success of it is to have a key leader who still is passionate about and cares about diversity. So if I'm not going to have a chief diversity officer in my company, do I have a CEO who still is kind of spiritually driving this? Do I have a chief people officer who still is interested in spiritually driving this? I know there will be people out there, very appropriately so, who will say, well, if you bury it within the organization in these different places, you lose the focus. And that certainly is a possibility. And so to me, I think where I've seen things work best is where you have that CEO, chief people officer alignment around diversity, equity, inclusion, because if you have that, you pretty much pick up most of the opportunities and things don't fall through the cracks. If you don't have that, if they're ambivalent, then things may get lost in the cracks if you don't have a chief diversity officer in place who is on a regular basis kind of beating the drum on behalf of diversity and advocating for diversity.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm right there with you. Let's talk a little bit more about Glassdoor, right? Like we're having this interview towards like the end of the year. I'm going to say, we're like, it's August, we're going to look up, it's going to be November. And by the time, honestly, Halloween comes, the year's kind of over. So like, I'm curious, what have you been most proud of at Glassdoor and the work that you've been able to do? And then what are you most excited about?
So for Glassdoor, I think this is going to sound. I think the first thing that I've been really excited about is really getting to know my organization and getting my arms around the organization and the people in it. And when I say my organization, I mean in particular the people team, the people, places, and experiences team. It's been a challenging year. The first month I came in, we instituted a hiring freeze across the company. 4 months later, we had 4 or 5 months later, we had a 15% layoff that my team had to help drive. We've had some open leadership roles within my team. And so it hasn't been easy necessarily. There have been some challenging circumstances and situations that we've faced together, but I've really enjoyed getting to know them. And I can also say that them as well as the executive team, um, I have felt like it is a very a very kind of low low key political environment. So there are places where sometimes you have to watch yourself, be really conscious of things. And it's not that I don't think about things all the time, but I find that the environment is one where if there have been challenges, it's been about the work, not about interpersonal, not about interpersonal stuff as much. Yeah. So that for me has been a lot of fun. I think the thing that I'm probably most proud of so far would be this is going to sound really weird and really technical, but the thing that I underestimated, frankly, in taking on a chief people officer role was the extent to which we spend on compensation. I totally underestimated that. As I talk with my peers now in different peer environments, they basically tell me that they all spend roughly 30 to 40% of their time on comp. And I didn't realize that when I took on this role. And I've had to do a crash course in comp. And fortunately, I've had a team that's been patient with me. I've got some really strong people in comp, but I've had to learn a ton. And I'm proud now that I feel like I can navigate at least one part of it. I've got the 101 course done. I need some other courses and everything, but I'm proud of both that as well as the ability to, I think, adapt. A lot of this year has been about adapting to different things, particularly as the economic environment has changed. On the more proactive kind of perspective front, I think what I'm most excited about that we've launched is we have launched a process to create company-wide competencies. Now, I know competencies for some of you out there may not seem like a sexy, fun thing, but the reason why I'm so passionate about them is a couple of things. One is that they provide an opportunity for you and I to have a clear discussion about how you're doing on what the expectations are for your role. So some good managers are really good at creating that, others not so good. But if we all have the same guide that we're starting with to begin with, I think that makes a difference across the organization. What that also gives, the ancillary effect of that, is that then I, as an individual contributor, understand how to navigate the organization. I can see exactly what it takes to be at the next level. Or if I'm in a position that has kind of a natural endpoint in terms of career, maybe I'm in a role where there really isn't space for something to be above director, I can look and see what senior director looks like in other parts of the organization and understand what competencies are required there. And maybe explore my ability to be able to move over to another group. This, of course, again, the third point is transparency and diversity. This makes the game much more transparent and gives everybody the ability to navigate things much better throughout the organization. So to me, that's a year-long project that we're engaged in on my team. I know, because we went through this when I was at Dropbox, for me, it was just fun when I was there to think about what the key skills and development points are for becoming a chief diversity officer, and to be able to write that out and then to be able to coach my team on it when I was there. So I think and hope that as we start to involve the leaders within Glassdoor in the process, that they'll feel the same excitement that I did. I think it's really neat to reflect on what it takes to grow into the roles that we have. So for me, that's probably the one that's top of mind. And then one other one that's top of mind is that we have definitely put a stake in the ground that we are a remote first or virtual first organization. So for us, what I did is I actually pivoted one of my teams. So we have the workplace experience team, which traditionally focuses a lot on real estate reports to me. What I did is I split that team and had half of them continue with real estate, but the other half become an event and experiences team to help us think through how to really create amazing virtual experiences. I know people talk about Zoom fatigue and a variety of things, but I feel like Zoom fatigue a lot of times is a product of poorly designed virtual experiences. Because I've had virtual experiences where the time flies by like that. Okay, and those are well designed. And so when I think about regular meetings and how they're structured, when I think about virtual offsites and how I structure them, when we think about all hands or town halls and how we structure them virtually, how do we make those engaging opportunities for connection, and making sure that we're achieving the objectives that we want to with them? And so we created a whole team to do that. And so that's only one small part. We're looking at our meeting culture. We're looking at core collaboration hours. We're looking at working increasingly asynchronously by default where we can, and trying to have meetings be interactive time for debate, dialogue, and key decision making. Our whole sense of work practices, I think, will need to change as we become virtual first organizations. And there are a number of us that are trying to figure this out, some more advanced than others. We're probably in between on our journey. That's something that I'm really excited about that my team is also leading this year.
That sounds incredible. And Dan, I'm gonna tell you something, man. Like, it's obvious that they made the right decision to bring you in as a head of the chief. Come on, look how you like. And I also think like what's so dope about this is like there's some meta observation and commentary here around like really what does an effective like chief people officer, head of people really look like, right? Like the fact that you're thinking about the employee experience end to end and the various dynamics within that, right, all the time. And then not only about like what you're doing, but how you're then mobilizing your team. You know, look, I have like two more questions. Okay. So like, so, you know, the proliferation of AI, particularly these language learning models and, intersecting with labor and all this, like, I'm curious, like, where do you see paths of potential success? Like what about AI excites you as it pertains to employee experience and let's just say the broader concept of, or topic of workplace fairness? And then what are things that you're genuinely concerned about that bring you any pause?
Sure. So I'm one who is generally more in the excited about it camp in general. So I'll start there definitely, because it's something that I've spent a decent amount of time thinking about, and I'm pushing different members of my team to think about and explore. I think the first thing that people always go to the address of job elimination a lot of times when we talk about this, but somebody else flipped the way that I think about it. I was at a chief people officer event, and there was this person who spoke, who she wasn't speaking. We were just in a discussion, just the two of us. And she's an external consultant who works with a lot of organizations. And she said, another way to think about artificial intelligence or generative AI is not necessarily as a replacement for people, but think of it as another member of your team. So you've got your head of total rewards, you've got all these people on your team. What would this generative AI person who's reporting to you do? They might do work across your team, just like in diversity or anything else. They might have a discrete function that they perform. But for me, that's the first thing that I started to think about. The second thing is what I look at is there low value work that our people are doing? When I say low value, I don't mean that it's not necessarily valuable to the organization. What I mean is that it cognitively doesn't require as much from them. And so are there ways that we can move that out and have AI cover that versus them having to do it? And it's not with the goal of eliminating their role. It's with the goal of making them more of a value add to the organization and giving them potentially more fun, interesting, engaging, and impactful work. Okay? So to me, that's the second part. A third one is anything that is at volume where we're kind of overrun. The example right now that we're working through is that we have, because of the tightening of the market recently, when we open roles now, I was just in a meeting today with my talent acquisition team, and one of the things they were talking about is how they rate the difficulty of roles that they have to hire, because they're not all equal. And so one of the fun facts that they shared with me was that pre-pandemic, the average number of applications that they would get in for a role was about 25 to 30. Now in this environment, when we open roles, we get on average over 250 applications. Okay? I'll give you some personal examples that I have. I recently opened and toward the tail end of interviewing for a senior director of diversity role that will report to me. Exactly, yes. We had over 700 applications in 5 days. We had to take it off. We had to take it off at that point because it was just too much for the recruiter to go through. So when I think about situations like that, that's something where I see some type of AI tool hopefully coming in, being able to help us to solve for these bottlenecks that we have. So to me, again, thinking of it framework wise as a partner to augment the work that I do and as a team member, thinking about low value work versus high value work, and are there places where there are repetitive things being done at volume where it can come in and help. To me, those are some of the immediate applications. I think the fear that I have is that I found sometimes that the fear is about the fear that people have of it, and that is that a lot of people fear that it's going to take their jobs. I know for some people on my team that I wanted to ask to explore it, one person was a little resistant at first, and it took me a while to get them to move along and say, okay. What was funny was that they flipped entirely once they got into it, and they learned a ton, and now they're becoming one of the advocates for it. But getting over that hump a lot of times at the beginning is difficult because people see their value as threatened. To me, this is another one of those big trends. A lot of times when I've done presentations about all the jobs that exist today that did not exist before 2007, because that was the advent of the iPhone. So mobile app developers, a lot of the social media people, all these roles that now exist that were either a function of the phone itself or because of the access that we got through apps on the phone, all of a sudden started to exist. Okay? I feel like AI is the same, where we're going to have a whole new set of roles and needs that all of a sudden exist. The other fear that I'll mention is that I do believe in a meta sense, it will probably create as many roles as it might destroy, but the matchup between those two is always hard because it's probably going to be white collar augmented roles that are created, and probably blue collar or more repetitive roles, more low value roles, where for somebody to make the jump from there to there is either going to be difficult, may be fraught with difficulty and obstacles. So that's a real, I think, practical fear that we'll have to work through as we integrate AI into what we do.
There's something to be said also, like, so living corporate, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but living corporate, we have our own AI models that we've built, right? And like part of our internal philosophy is, hey, we're treating this like a really smart college intern, right? Like we're going to ask it to do something, and then we're going to review it several times, and then we'll move forward, right? Like this attitude, I think, of, treating AI like it's this thing that's going to just ideate out of nothing. I think it's frankly informed by a lot of pop culture. Terminator has been very popular, The Matrix, right? So we think like, oh, it's like this thing that can like think and move, and like, it's like, not really, right? And I think the other piece, though, is something you said about like the fact that AI is not about role replacement, but role enrichment. I agree. That presumes, though, a certain level of ethics in your business, right? And so like, there's something to be said for, and I hope that there's a rise, and I mean, well, frankly, they keep on silencing all the Black women that have been raising all these concerns. I'm hopeful for some type of return, some type of acknowledgement of and embracing of truth there. That, hey, this intern can create all this stuff. Treat it like an intern. Don't treat it like a one-to-one copy of this 15-year experienced person who has all this expertise, train allow the person who has the historical knowledge and expertise to, just like it would mentor an intern, manage and oversee these AI tools, right? And so I too fall in the excited bucket. But it's because but it's the premise I'm engaging. I also do see, and it's wild because like some of this kind of goes with like the reality of like this late stage capitalist society. I don't know, maybe we might be beyond late stage at this point. But it's just everyone's trying to figure out how to just extract as much in exchange for as little as possible. And so like my hope is that people do embrace your philosophies, Danny, more than the opposite, and really think about it like, okay, we have this tool that has now handled some of these low cognitive tasks. We still now have an accountability and responsibility to create an experience for this employee who has value outside of pressing zeros and ones every day, right? Okay, now Danny, I'm gonna be honest. We could talk forever, but you dropped so many bars. I'm gonna end it here. Here's what as we wrap up, man. Like, here's my question. I'll just kind of give you last word. Here is, the landscape full of fears, anxieties, concerns. I keep on saying this in a lot of these a lot of our conversations recently. Is I'm going to embrace the fact that every white executive is not some monopoly man, evil guy. Okay. And I want to believe that there are folks out there who really want to do right, even in this moment, but are unsure of what to do and where to start. If you were to give like just 3 points of advice in this season, and for context, because in case, when the alien, well, I mean, the alien's already here, but when the aliens reveal themselves and they hear this recording 500 years from now, the season what I'm talking about is, political unrest coming into a presidential election 2024, SCOTUS decisions. Like, what advice would you give in this season to well-meaning executives trying to do the right thing?
Yeah. So there are a couple things. I think one is to recognize the influence that you have through little micro actions. And I have a couple of examples for you, one that somebody else does and one that I do. One that somebody else does is our chief operating officer that I work with here at Glassdoor. His name is Owen Humphreys. And in our meetings, one of the things that I noticed very early on is that, and he still does this all the time, is that when we were in meetings and he would talk about something that maybe we had talked about earlier or that I had mentioned something about earlier, he would always make a point of saying, like Danny said before, da 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 da. He did that on a regular basis and acknowledged things that I'd said or that we had talked about in other forums. It wasn't that I was talked over by anybody or anything like that, but he made a point to do that. And as somebody who was new to the company, I felt like that was really building my credibility within the organization in a significant way. And it's something that he just did unconsciously. I think he didn't make a point. He wasn't my mentor or anything like that officially, but he made a point to do that. Another thing that he made a point to do was to be kind of my resource to explain things to me outside of the meeting that I might not know because I was new to the organization. He would Slack me about certain things where people were discussing things that I didn't have background on and tell me what was happening and why we got to where we were. So framing and being my Glassdoor historian to some extent. So I shared those as individual actions that he took that were really powerful for me. One that I've taken a lot is that many times in our senior executive meetings, there are groups of people who will come in to make a presentation on something, but one person, usually the senior person, will be the primary person who presents. One of the things that I do is when they're either during or when they're close to done with their presentation, I always ask all the other people who are usually a few levels below them who come in with them what their opinion is on something and what they found most interesting about it. Because to me, everybody looks at the elephant in a different way. Some people see the snout, Some people see the tail, some people see the side. And so I like to hear from them, and I'm assuming they're in the room for a reason. I've actually gotten private notes from people afterward who said that they really appreciated the fact that I gave them the space to speak, that they weren't normally accustomed to doing that in a senior executive meeting, and that it really made a difference to them. And sometimes their managers even would write to me and tell me that. And it's something that my CEO separately said now that he wants to start doing when he's in different meetings, because people are presenting to him all the time and he noticed it. So I guess what I'm getting at is, don't underestimate. I know we have these things that are going on globally, not necessarily worldwide, but at a larger scale that may seem insurmountable. But don't discount both the power individually that you have with other people and what modeling certain behaviors can do and how it can catch on with other folks. I didn't talk to my CEO about doing what I'm doing in terms of talking to junior people in presentations. He just told me, yes, I like that you do that. I'm starting to do that now. So those are kind of two easy takeaways, I'd say. And then the last one I'd say is that no matter what the Supreme Court or Congress or anybody else tries to legislate, diversity isn't going away. Because diversity is people. Our country is becoming increasingly diverse. That's not ending. And so, yes, we can try and do these things, but it's like water. You don't stop water. It's going to find another way in. And so even though the ways that we've done things may be challenged and we may have to revisit them, it's not the end, and there will still be opportunities. And it's something that every executive, I think, needs to continue to think about, because it is our employee base. It is the people that work for us and the people who we're recruiting. And so no matter what anybody says in the Supreme Court, that's not changing. And it's a strategic imperative for each and every one of us.
Ooh, ooh. Mic drop. Danny, I appreciate you, man. Look, you're a friend of the show, a friend of mine. I look forward to having you back soon. We'll talk later, man.
Thanks, Zach. And I just want to say one more thing. I really appreciate the platform that Living Corporate creates. It's really powerful. I'm excited for what you're doing and where you're taking things. And I know all of us in the community want to support you, and we'll continue to find ways to support the work that you and the team are doing. So thank you for being you and playing this role. It's critical, and we appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you, man. I appreciate you too. We'll talk later. And we're back. Yo, shout out to Danny Guillory. Shout out to the work that Glassdoor is doing. Really critical things they're doing over there in the world of transparency and accountability and employee experience. And also just shout out to the leaders aiming to lead, right? This is not an easy time for anybody. And so I'm not ignorant to, nor am I insensitive to the significant minority of executive leaders trying to do the right thing. Significant minority for sure, but significant, real talk though. So we appreciate you. Much love. Make sure you take care of yourselves, each other. Remember, keep everything in its place and hug somebody that you love. Make sure you tell somebody you love them today. Real talk, because life is not promised. Okay. I love you. I'll talk to you later. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.